The wind cut across the valley like a blade, whistling through the burned-out pines and rusted barbed wire that once fenced in cattle and hope. It was late autumn, and frost had already settled over the Montana foothills, clinging to the weeds that curled around the crumbling posts. Stella Jones pulled her flannel tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of her dented blue Subaru, the gravel crunching under her boots. The air smelled of cold earth and regret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She stared at what the auctioneer called a fixer-upper. In truth, it was a collapsed barn, half sunk into the soil. Its roof caved inward like a tired old man bowing under too much weight. The red paint had long peeled into ghostly grey planks. A few stubborn boards jutted out like broken ribs. Yet somehow to Stella there was a strange pull to it. Something about this ruin spoke to the part of her that had been broken and forgotten too. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" came a young voice behind her. Her 10-year-old son, Eli, hopped out of the car, a knitted cap pulled low over his ears. His cheeks were pink from the cold. He squinted at the barn, wrinkling his nose. "It looks like it could fall over if I sneeze." Stella smiled weakly. "It's just temporary, kiddo." She didn't add that temporary was all she could afford now. 3 weeks earlier, she'd lost everything. Her job at the Forestry Service was gone after the budget cuts. The small rental cabin they'd lived in near Bozeman had been foreclosed when she fell behind on payments. And her ex-husband, Eli's father, hadn't sent a dime in over a year. When the county posted a public auction of old rural lots, she'd scraped together her last $1,500 from savings, hoping for a miracle. What she got was a collapsed barn on 6 acres of wild land nobody else wanted, sold to Miss Jones, the auctioneer had said that morning, his voice echoing over the empty field. 6 acres, old barn, one well, as is. Now, standing in front of it, Stella wasn't sure if she'd made a desperate mistake or planted the first seed of something new. They spent the afternoon exploring. The land sloped gently downward toward a patch of overgrown apple trees, their fruit rotting sweetly in the grass. Beyond that, a creek cut through the property, its water cold and clear as glass. Eli found an old horseshoe buried near the fence line and held it up proudly. "Maybe it's good luck," he said. "Maybe it's just old iron," Stella replied, but she couldn't help smiling. "Let's hope you're right." Inside the barn, shafts of sunlight speared through the gaps in the wood, illuminating motes of dust that swirled like golden snow. The smell of hay and old timber was thick. Stella carefully stepped around splintered beams. In one corner stood the remnants of an old stall, still lined with brittle straw. Nearby, a rusted milk pail lay overturned, half buried in dirt. "Looks like it's been abandoned for decades," she murmured. "Think there were animals here?" Eli asked, poking at a plank with a stick. "Once upon a time," she said softly. "Maybe horses, maybe cows, maybe dreams." He looked at her curiously, sensing the sadness behind her words. By sunset, the temperature dropped fast. They set up their small camping stove outside the car, heating a can of soup. As the mountains turned purple against the dying light, Stella felt the ache of exhaustion crawl into her bones. But she also felt something else, a quiet, stubborn spark. "We'll fix it," she told Eli, watching his breath puff like smoke. "The barn, the land, everything. Maybe even us," he grinned, his gap-toothed smile lighting up the dark. "We're mountain people now, huh?" "Guess so," she said, and reached over to ruffle his hair. When he fell asleep that night in the back seat, bundled in blankets, Stella sat by the dying fire, her thoughts heavy. Her fingers traced the edges of the auction papers again and again. The land wasn't worth much, but it was theirs, and that was something no one could take away anymore. She listened to the wind move through the trees, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures in the brush. There was a strange feeling she couldn't quite name, a sense that this place was hiding stories older than her grief. The next morning, the first frost glittered over the grass like sugar. Eli was already up, chasing a crow away from their trash bag. Stella poured instant coffee into a tin mug, stretching her sore back. "Can we go inside the barn again?" Eli asked. She hesitated. "It's not safe, honey. The floorboards could give way. I'll be careful," he insisted, his eyes bright with curiosity. "I want to see what's under there." Under there, she frowned slightly at the phrase. The barn did sit low, its foundation half swallowed by the ground. Some spots had sunken deep, as if the earth had opened its mouth over the years and begun to eat the structure whole. Still, she nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you." They pushed open the side door again, its hinges groaning like an old man's sigh. Light poured in through the cracks, illuminating the warped floor. As they stepped inside, Stella felt a hollow sound under her boot. Thunk, different from the rest. Eli heard it too. "Mom, what was that?" She crouched, tapping the spot. The wood was uneven, and part of it had been replaced by a newer plank long ago. Strange! She pried at it with her pocket knife, and the wood lifted easily. Beneath it was a dark, narrow gap filled with dirt and old stone. "Looks like some kind of crawl space," she said slowly. Eli knelt beside her, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Can I see?" "Careful," she warned, shining her flashlight into the opening. The beam caught on something metallic deep below, a glimmer, faint but distinct. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The light danced across the shape again. It wasn't junk. It wasn't stone. It was something else. "Mom," Eli whispered, eyes wide. "What's that?" Stella swallowed hard, heart thudding. "I don't know," she said softly. "But we're going to find out." That night, as the wind howled outside their car, Stella couldn't sleep. The image of that glint beneath the barn haunted her, the strange metallic shine buried in the earth. It could be nothing. It could be something. But whatever it was, she felt a pull again, stronger this time, like the land itself was whispering to her. "Maybe we were meant to find this place," she murmured to herself. And outside, the wind seemed to answer. The next morning dawned grey and brittle, a low fog hanging between the pines like a ghost that refused to leave. Stella Jones woke to the sound of crows arguing in the distance, their cries sharp against the cold silence. She rubbed her eyes, feeling the stiffness in her neck from another night spent in the car. Eli was still asleep under a heap of blankets, one small hand clutching the old horseshoe he'd found the day before. For a long moment Stella watched him. His chest rose and fell in the soft rhythm of dreams, and she felt that familiar mix of love and guilt. Love for the boy who gave her reason, guilt for dragging him into her own storm of bad luck and desperation. The glint beneath the barn's floorboards wouldn't leave her mind. She'd lain awake half the night, replaying that fleeting shimmer of metal, wondering what could be buried there. Treasure, junk, something dangerous? The rational part of her said it was probably an old farm tool or a piece of rusted pipe. But something deeper, older, whispered that the land wanted to tell her a story, and she needed a story with a better ending. By mid-morning, Eli was up, bundled in 2 coats, munching on a granola bar. "Can we go back inside now?" he asked, eyes bright with excitement. Stella sighed but smiled. "You really can't let it go, huh?" "Nope," he said proudly. "What if it's treasure?" She chuckled. "Treasure? What do you think this is, a pirate movie?" "Maybe," he said, mouthful. "Maybe it's gold." Gold! The word hung in the cold air between them. Stella tried to laugh it off, but the idea hit something in her chest. Not greed, but hope. They could use hope. Good, they could use anything. "All right," she said finally. "Let's see what's down there. But we do it carefully." The barn groaned under their weight as they entered again. Dust drifted through the slanted beams of light. Stella carried her flashlight and a small hand shovel she'd found in the trunk. Eli held a thermos and the air of an explorer on the verge of discovery. They found the same plank easily, the one that had sounded hollow yesterday. She wedged her knife under the edge again, prying it up. The wood creaked, dry and fragile, revealing the dark gap below. The smell of damp earth rose up, cool and musty. Eli crouched beside her. "It's like a secret hole," he whispered. Stella aimed her flashlight down. The beam caught something solid, stone, a flat surface, maybe 4 feet below. She brushed some dirt away, revealing what looked like an iron handle half buried in the soil. Her pulse quickened. "It's a trap door," she breathed. Eli's eyes widened. "No way!" "Way," she said softly. "But it's sealed pretty tight." They spent the next hour clearing away the dirt around it. The handle was rusted, the metal cold against her gloves. Finally, with a grunt, Stella pulled upward. The latch resisted, then gave way with a metallic snap. The heavy door shifted slightly, releasing a gust of stale, underground air. They both leaned back, coughing. "Smells like old potatoes," Eli said, wrinkling his nose. "Could be a root cellar," Stella replied, trying to convince herself of the same. Old farms often had underground storage for food. That was all this was? Old storage? Still, the air that rose from below felt different, ancient, like it had been trapped too long. With her flashlight between her teeth, Stella pried the door open fully. Beneath it, a wooden ladder descended into darkness. The first few rungs looked intact, though coated in grime. Beyond them, only shadow. "You stay here," she said immediately. Eli's face fell. "Mom!" No arguments. "If this thing collapses, I don't want you falling in after me." "But, Eli..." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You're my lookout, okay? If anything happens, you run to the road and wave down someone. Got it?" He nodded reluctantly, his small hands gripping the edge of the opening. "Be careful," she smiled faintly. "Always." Then she descended. The ladder groaned but held her weight. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of damp soil and iron. At the bottom, her boots sank into soft dirt. She swung her flashlight around. The beam revealed stone walls, roughly built, maybe 6 feet high. The space was small, no larger than a shed, with shelves carved into the stone itself. Old jars lined them, some cracked, others sealed with wax, so thick they looked fossilized. "This must be the old cellar," she muttered, half to herself. Then her light caught on something odd. A wooden crate pushed into a corner. It was different from the rest of the cellar's contents, newer, cleaner, and marked with a symbol she didn't recognize. A circle with a W inside it, painted in faded red. Her heart thudded. "Mom?" Eli's voice echoed faintly from above. "I'm fine," she called back. "Just looking." She crouched beside the crate, brushing away the dirt. The lid was nailed shut but rotted in places. She wedged her knife into the seam, pried, and the wood splintered apart. Inside were small canvas bags, each one tied with twine. She lifted one carefully, surprised by the weight. The fabric was rough, stained with age. She untied the string and poured a bit of the contents into her hand. Her breath caught. Gold coins. For a moment she couldn't move. The world seemed to shrink around the small pile of glittering metal in her palm. They were old, each stamped with dates she couldn't immediately read, but one thing was certain. They were real. "Mom." Eli called again, voice nervous now. "What is it?" Stella swallowed hard. "Nothing," she said quickly, her mind spinning. "Just old junk. Be right up." She looked again at the coins, her heart pounding like a drum. There were at least a dozen small bags in the crate. Dozens of coins in each. Maybe hundreds, maybe more. Gold, real gold. Her fingers trembled. If this was what it looked like, then this barn, this broken piece of land she'd bought for almost nothing, might be worth millions. She forced herself to climb the ladder back up, closing the trapdoor behind her. Eli was waiting, wide-eyed. "Well?" he demanded. "What was down there?" "Just old supplies," she said, her voice too calm, too controlled. "Nothing much." He frowned, unconvinced. "You're lying." "I can tell," she smiled weakly. "Maybe, but let's not tell anyone what we've found yet, okay? Not until we're sure." Eli nodded solemnly. "Is it a secret?" "Big secret," she said. As they stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, spilling light across the field. The barn's shadow stretched long and sharp over the frost. Stella turned back to look at it, the ruin, the decay, the impossible truth hiding underneath. She felt dizzy, as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis. 6 acres of forgotten land. A collapsed barn, and now something buried that could change everything. But even as wonder bloomed in her chest, a darker thought crept in behind it. If someone had buried that gold here, then someone had once meant to come back for it. The next few days passed like a dream wrapped in fog, unreal and fragile, as if the world around them might collapse at any moment, revealing something darker beneath. Stella Jones couldn't stop replaying the moment she'd opened the crate. The gleam of the coins, the way her hands had trembled as if she were holding something forbidden. She hadn't told Eli the truth. Not fully. He knew they'd found something, but she downplayed it, and calling it scrap metal. That night, while he'd slept in the car, she'd returned to the cellar with her flashlight and counted the bags one by one. 42 canvas bags, each filled with coins. Most were stamped 1930 to 1933, some earlier. Liberty heads, double eagles. A few Canadian maple leaves mixed in. Old gold, old enough to make her heart hammer in her chest. She'd done the math roughly in her head, maybe $5 or $6 million worth if it was real, and that was the problem. It was too real, too much, too convenient. So instead of digging deeper, she buried the crate again, nailing the trapdoor shut from above. She'd told herself she was protecting her son. But deep down, she knew she was stalling because she was afraid that this miracle might turn out to be a curse. On the third morning, she drove the Subaru into town, a tiny mountain settlement called Pine Hollow, with one diner, one post office, and one half-forgotten library. Eli sat in the passenger seat swinging his legs. "Why are we going to the library? We don't even have Wi-Fi there. I need to look up some old records," Stella said, forcing calm into her voice. "Something about the barn," he frowned. "You mean about the gold?" "Shh," she hissed. "We don't say that word out loud, okay? Not to anyone." He crossed his arms. "You always say secrets are bad." "This one's an exception," she said, half smiling despite herself. The library was small but warm, smelling of paper and pine oil. An elderly librarian named Martha Dean greeted them from behind a desk, stacked with old newspapers. "Well, if it isn't new faces, you the folks who bought the old Wexler place?" Stella froze. "The what place?" "Wexler Barn," Martha said cheerfully. "Out near the Creek Road, right? Lord, that property's been empty near 50 years. Surprised anyone wanted it." Stella's pulse quickened. "Wexler," she repeated carefully. "Do you have anything on that? Old records, maybe?" Martha chuckled. "You looking for ghost stories or property deeds, honey?" "Maybe both," Stella said with a tight smile. In the back room, surrounded by dusty ledgers and yellowed microfilm, Stella and Eli pored through the town's old archives. The name Wexler appeared again and again in the 1920s and 30s. At first it was just mentions, land purchases, farming notes, tax payments. Then in an edition of the Pine Hollow Gazette dated June 12, 1934, Stella found a headline that made her breath catch. "Local man missing after bank robbery. $6 million in gold vanishes." The article told the story of Robert Wexler, a respected rancher who'd suddenly been accused of masterminding a heist on a federal gold transport bound for Denver. According to reports, the robbers had stolen several crates of minted gold coins and vanished into the mountains. A week later, authorities found 2 of the men dead in a burned-out cabin near the state line. But Wexler himself was never found, nor was the gold. Below the article, a grainy photograph showed a man in suspenders and a wide-brimmed hat standing proudly in front of a barn that looked unmistakably familiar. Eli leaned over her shoulder. "Mom," he whispered, "that's our barn." Stella's stomach twisted. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is?" The librarian returned a few minutes later, carrying a box. "Found this in our old records closet," Martha said. "Wexler's name's on some of the property deeds. He took out a big loan right before he disappeared. Never paid it back, of course. The county repossessed the land after his wife died in 35. Did they ever find the gold?" Stella asked, trying to sound casual. Martha snorted. They searched for years. Treasure hunters, FBI, even a few college kids back in the 60s. Folks say the old man buried it somewhere on that land, but nobody ever found a dime." She winked. "Maybe you'll get lucky." Stella forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe." Back outside, the sky had turned silver with afternoon snow clouds. Eli walked beside her in silence, kicking at the gravel. Finally, he said, "Mom, that guy, Wexler, If he stole the gold and buried it, does that mean it's bad to keep it? The question hung between them like cold breath. Stella didn't answer right away. I don't know, she said finally. But I do know this. Sometimes life hands you something that isn't simple. What matters is what we do with it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eli nodded, but he looked troubled. They drove home in silence, snow beginning to drift lazily across the windshield. When they reached the property, the barn stood like a dark monument against the fading light. Stella stared at it, the words of the newspaper still echoing in her mind. $6 million in gold vanishes. Local man missing. Never found. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Stella sat by the small campfire outside the barn. The stars above were cold and sharp. In her lap, she held one of the gold coins. She'd slipped it into her jacket pocket that morning. Unable to resist, she turned it over in the firelight. The eagle engraved on one side glinting with impossible beauty. It was real, undeniably real, but so was the danger. If anyone knew what she'd found, even hinted, she and Eli could lose everything. The government, the banks, the greedy, they'd come for it. For her, she closed her fist around the coin. Wexler, she whispered into the night. What did you do with the rest of your life? The fire cracked softly. Somewhere beyond the trees, a coyote called, its cry echoing across the valley like a warning. Before going to sleep, Stella made a decision. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper, literally and figuratively. She'd open the other crates, catalog everything, and maybe contact someone she could trust to verify the coin's authenticity. But as she approached the car, she froze. The barn door was open, wide open. She knew she'd latched it shut earlier. Her breath caught. Eli, she whispered, glancing toward the car. He was still asleep, his small body curled under blankets. Then she heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from inside the barn. She reached for the flashlight, her pulse hammering, and slowly stepped toward the open door. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing the ladder, the trapdoor, still sealed. But near the far wall, footprints marked the dirt floor. Fresh ones, and there, in the half-light, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, carved faintly into one of the old wooden beams. Nearly hidden beneath dust and time, not safe above, her breath hitched. The message was old, written decades ago, maybe by Wexler himself. Not safe above. She backed away slowly, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows. Whatever had been buried under this barn wasn't just gold, it was a secret someone had died to keep. The storm rolled in before dawn. Thick flakes of snow fell in silence, blanketing the valley and muting every sound, except the occasional groan of the barn under the weight of ice. Stella Jones woke to the chill that crept through the car windows, her breath forming clouds in the pale light. She checked on Eli, still curled beneath his quilt. Then quietly she stepped out into the snow. The world felt eerie, too still, too white, like it was holding its breath. Her boots crunched through the powder as she walked toward the barn. The door was still slightly ajar. That unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She'd shut it again last night after seeing those strange footprints and the carved warning, "Not safe above." Now the prints were gone, buried under new snow. Maybe it was just animals, she murmured to herself, forcing reason into her voice. Coyote, maybe. But deep down she didn't believe it. Inside, the air was sharp and cold. The beam she'd found the message on looked even older in the morning light, the letters rough, carved with a knife. She traced the words again, whispering them out loud. Not safe above. Her flashlight caught a movement in the corner, a shape, small, sudden. Mom! Stella spun around to see Eli standing in the doorway, his jacket half-zipped, cheeks red from the cold. You scared me to death, she said. He grinned sheepishly. You scared me. You weren't in the car, she exhaled, forcing a smile. I just needed to check something. About the message? She hesitated. Yeah, something like that. He followed her gaze toward the carved warning. Do you think it's a ghost? More likely an old farmer who got tired of fixing the roof, she said lightly, but the joke fell flat. Her gut told her it meant more. By afternoon, the snow had thickened, coming down in heavy, swirling waves. Stella decided to make a real fire near the car, using kindling she'd gathered from the edge of the woods. She set a pot of soup on the small stove. Eli hummed to himself as he stacked wood. "This place feels different when it snows," he said. "Like it's hiding secrets." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Just feels that way. Like it's watching us." Before she could answer, a sound drifted through the wind, the low growl of an engine. She froze. Out here, miles from the nearest paved road, they never heard vehicles. A few moments later, a black pickup truck emerged through the curtain of snow, tires crunching up the long, narrow drive. Stella stood, heart hammering. The truck stopped 20 yards away. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, with a heavy coat, snow-dusted boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He carried himself like someone used to the cold, confident, steady, but wary. "Afternoon," he called over the wind. Stella stayed where she was, one hand hovering near Eli's shoulder. "Can I help you?" The man smiled faintly. "Name's Colton Reeves. Sorry to intrude. I didn't expect anyone out here." "We live here," Stella said carefully. His eyes flicked to the barn, then back to her. "You bought the old Wexler place, didn't you?" The name sent a jolt through her. "That's right," she said slowly. "Why?" He approached a few steps, keeping his hands visible. "I grew up 2 towns over. Used to hear stories about that land. My granddad worked with Robert Wexler back in the 30s before he went missing. Figured I'd see what became of the place." Eli whispered, "Mom." Stella nodded slightly, warning him to stay quiet. "What kind of stories?" she asked, watching the man's eyes. Reeves shrugged. "Treasure hunters, FBI agents, all that. Folks said Wexler buried gold somewhere around here before he disappeared. Crazy stuff, really. People still care about that." He gave a half smile. "In these parts, a legend like that doesn't die easy." They stood in tense silence for a moment as the wind howled through the pines. "Mind if I take a look around?" Reeves asked finally. "Just nostalgia." "I promise I won't touch anything." Stella hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but she couldn't afford to draw suspicion either. "Fine," she said. "Stay clear of the barn, though." "It's not safe." He nodded politely. "Fair enough." She watched him circle the property, slow, deliberate. His gaze lingered on the barn more than once. He was too calm, too observant. When he returned, snow clinging to his coat, he said, I always thought Wexler was framed." She blinked. "Framed?" "Sure. Story goes, the real thieves used his property to stash the gold, then killed each other fighting over it. Government pinned the blame on him because he vanished." Stella felt her stomach twist. "So you think he didn't take it?" "Not him," Reeves said, his voice lowering. "But somebody sure as hell did. And if the gold's ever found, it won't be as simple as keeping it." He tipped his hat. "Take care of yourself, Miss Jones. Storm's getting worse." Then he turned, climbed into his truck and drove away. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. Eli tugged at her sleeve. "He knew about the gold, didn't he?" "Yes," she whispered. "He knew. Do you think he'll come back?" Stella stared down the long white road where the truck had disappeared. "I think we should assume he will. That evening she hid the gold differently. She waited until Eli slept, then crept to the trapdoor, pried it open, and carried the crate's contents to a new hole behind the barn. Beneath the old apple trees, her hands were raw from the cold, her breath ragged in the dark. She buried the bags deep, tamping the soil hard with her boots. When she finished, she leaned on her shovel, staring toward the road. The snow was still falling, thick and soundless. "Not safe above," she whispered again, remembering the carved warning. Maybe Wexler had written it before he vanished. Maybe he'd known someone was coming for him, and now, decades later, the same thing might be starting all over again. The next morning, Stella woke to a strange sound. Not wind, not animals. Something heavier. She stepped out of the car, snow crunching under her boots, and froze. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. They led straight up the driveway and stopped beside the barn. Her pulse spiked. She looked toward the entrance. The door hung wide open again, swaying in the morning breeze, and this time She knew for certain someone had been inside again. The morning air was razor-sharp, the kind that bit straight through flannel and bone. Stella Jones stood at the threshold of the barn, staring down at the fresh tire tracks half buried in snow. The truck, Colton Reeves's black pickup, was gone, but the evidence it had been there again during the night was undeniable. Her heart pounded, the same rhythm she'd felt the day she first lifted that floorboard. Fear and adrenaline, thick and sour in her blood. She turned toward the car. Eli was still asleep, a tangle of blankets and curls in the back seat. She hesitated, then grabbed the flashlight and slipped inside the barn alone. The door creaked shut behind her. Inside, it was darker than before, too dark. The snow outside reflected what little light filtered through the cracks, but something in the air felt different, heavier. The floor where she'd resecured the trapdoor was slightly disturbed. The layer of dirt she'd spread over it had been brushed aside by someone's boot. Someone had definitely been here. Colton, she whispered under her breath, the name sour on her tongue. She crouched and ran her fingers along the edge of the board. It had been pried up, then set back down, not properly nailed this time. Whoever it was had gone down there. Her pulse roared in her ears. She slowly lifted the plank and aimed her flashlight into the cellar. The ladder was wet, the dirt below freshly disturbed. A faint metallic smell drifted up, oil maybe or gunmetal. She swallowed hard. Against every rational thought screaming at her to walk away, she climbed down. At the bottom, the air was colder than before. Her flashlight beams swept across the walls. The shelves were the same, lined with old jars, but the crate she'd left buried and nailed shut was open and empty. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She turned in a slow circle, light catching on something shiny, half buried in the mud. She crouched and brushed away the dirt. A coin, one of hers, its edge smeared with fresh soil. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Whoever had come here had found the stash under the apple trees, dug it up, taken it back here, or maybe found this place first, and then realized there was more outside. Her mind reeled. How could they have known? She had told no one. No one but Reeves, she hissed, but the realization that followed was worse. The tire tracks were fresh, hours old. He could still be close. When she climbed out of the cellar, she nearly tripped over something by the door, a footprint, large, booted, partially melted into the snow that had blown inside. And beside it, a torn scrap of paper. She picked it up. The paper was old, the ink faded, but she could still make out the words scrawled in a hurried hand. "It's not buried alone." Her breath caught. Not buried alone. She turned the phrase over in her head. Was it a warning? A clue? Her flashlight flickered, sputtering weakly. She turned toward the door and froze. Someone was standing outside, a tall figure shadowed by the glare of morning snow. For one heartbeat, her mind screamed Reeves, but as the shape moved closer, she realized this wasn't him. The person was smaller, shoulders hunched, coat patched and threadbare. An older man with a grizzled beard and piercing eyes. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked like gravel. "You Stella Jones?" She didn't answer, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. He raised his hands slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you. Name's Gideon Wexler." Her breath hitched. "Wexler," he nodded. "Robert Wexler was my grandfather." Stella's mind blanked for a moment. "That's impossible. He died in 1934. Disappeared," Gideon said quietly. "Didn't die. Least not that anyone could prove. My pa was born a few months after he vanished. Spent his whole life looking for answers. Passed the stories down to me." He glanced toward the barn. "He used to say the gold wasn't the real secret. Said my granddad was running from something worse than the law." "Worse?" Stella repeated faintly. Gideon nodded. "Government men came around after the robbery. Called it federal business. But folks around here said they were something else. Men who didn't show badges, just questions. They were looking for something buried under that barn, something they said wasn't gold." Her stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" "Documents," he said. "Blueprints, ledgers, maybe even government payroll bonds. Stuff tied to the old gold standard. My granddad hid it all. Said if anyone found it, they'd never make it out alive. He looked at her steadily. And now you've stirred it up. The wind howled outside, slamming the barn door against its frame. Stella glanced over her shoulder instinctively. Someone's been here, she said. A man named Reeves. He said he knew your grandfather. Gideon's expression darkened. Reeves ain't what he says. Colton Reeves works for the Bureau of Reclamation, one of them contractors who's been poking around old federal mining sites. If he came here, it ain't for nostalgia. Her mouth went dry. You mean he's looking for the gold? Gold, Gideon muttered, and whatever's buried deeper than it. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was eerily quiet again, muffled beneath a thick white blanket. Gideon pulled a flask from his coat and took a sip. You need to leave, he said firmly. Take your boy and go. This land's cursed with more than greed. Stella shook her head. I can't just walk away. This is all we have. He studied her for a long moment. You got grit, I'll give you that. But you don't understand what's buried here. My granddad didn't steal that gold for himself. He was hiding it from the people who minted it. She frowned. Why? Because it was blood money, Gideon said, his voice dropping low. A payoff meant to cover up a killing up in the hills. Federal surveyors. 3 men who found something they weren't supposed to find. He took the gold to keep it from them. Hid it here. They came after him anyway. He looked toward the barn, his eyes far away. My pa used to say Wexler left a message before he disappeared, something carved in the wood. Stella felt her skin prickle. You mean not safe above? Gideon's head snapped toward her. You saw it. Yes, he exhaled slowly. Then the rest is true. There's more buried down there below the cellar. A second chamber. My granddad never finished sealing it off. A chill crawled up Stella's spine. How do you know? Because, Gideon said quietly, I found his journal when I was 15. It said the gold was only the surface. The real secret's what he hid under it. A sharp sound cut him off, the distant growl of an engine. They both turned toward the road. Through the veil of trees, a black truck was crawling up the drive again. Reeves, Stella whispered. Gideon's face hardened. Then it's already too late to run. He grabbed her arm. Get your boy inside the car and keep the engine running. If I'm right, he ain't here to talk. But what about... Go! Stella bolted for the car, snow crunching under her boots. Eli sat up, alarmed. Mom, what's happening? Buckle up, she said, breathless. As she slid behind the wheel, the black pickup stopped 30 feet away. Reeves stepped out, his face calm, almost pleasant, except this time. He wasn't smiling, and this time he had a gun. Snow crunched under Colton Reeves's boots as he stepped out of the black truck, his breath steaming in the cold. His gun was steady in his hand, casual but deliberate. His calmness made him even more dangerous. Stella Jones could hear her own pulse drumming in her ears. Her hands were tight on the steering wheel, but she didn't start the engine. Eli was watching, eyes wide, lips trembling. Mom, he whispered. Stay down, she said quietly, never taking her eyes off the man outside. Reeves stopped about 10 yards from the car, his face set in that same mask of polite menace. He lifted his free hand. Morning, Stella. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her voice was steady, though her throat burned with fear. You broke into my barn, he shrugged slightly. Borrowed entry. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. You mean the gold. A small smirk tugged at his mouth. Gold, silver, government bonds, whatever label makes you feel righteous about keeping stolen property. The sound of a shotgun being cocked shattered the quiet. Reeves froze. Gideon Wexler stepped out from behind the barn, the old weapon braced against his shoulder. His eyes were hard. You don't belong here, Reeves. Put the gun down. Reeves turned slowly toward him, his expression unreadable. Gideon Wexler, he said. Didn't think I'd find you crawling out of the hills again. Your family's been a thorn in the Bureau's side for a century. You don't know the first thing about my family. Oh, I know enough, Reeves said evenly. Your grandfather stole government assets. We've been trying to locate them for decades. The Jones woman here just stumbled on what we couldn't find. He turned his gaze back to Stella. Now be smart. Tell me where it is, and this ends quietly. Stella's fingers tightened on the wheel. Her voice trembled. You already took it. The crates, the coins, everything. Reeves's eyes flickered. Then you saw what was underneath? I saw nothing but dirt and lies, that small smirk returned. Then maybe I need to dig deeper. He began walking toward the barn. Stop! Gideon barked. Reeves didn't. The crack of the shotgun shattered the air. Snow exploded at Reeves's feet. He stumbled back, snarling. His gun rose, 2 shots fired in quick succession. Gideon ducked behind the doorframe, splinters raining down. "Mom!" Eli cried. Stella slammed her hand down on the ignition. The car roared to life. Reeves turned at the sound, firing once more. The bullet punched through the rear window, shattering glass across the seat. "Get down!" she yelled, throwing the car into reverse. The tires spun on the ice, the vehicle fishtailing wildly before catching traction. Reeves dove to the side as the car lurched backward. Snow spraying in every direction, she twisted the wheel. Swung the car around and tore down the narrow road. "Hold on, baby," she said, voice shaking. Behind them, the barn loomed smaller and smaller until it vanished into the storm. They didn't stop for miles. The snow thickened, hiding the mountain trail in a pale blur. When Stella finally pulled over near a cluster of pines, both of them were trembling. Eli clutched her arm. "Is he going to follow us?" Stella looked in the rearview mirror, nothing but falling snow and the faint glow of their exhaust. "Not right now," she said. "But he will." She leaned forward, forehead resting on the steering wheel, trying to slow her breathing. "Mom," Eli said softly, "why does he want the gold so bad?" Her eyes met his in the mirror. "Because it's not just gold," she said. "It's something that was never meant to be found." A faint rap on the window made her jump. She turned and saw Gideon limping toward the car, shotgun slung over his shoulder. His face was pale but intact. She rolled the window down an inch. "You're alive." "Barely," he rasped. "Reeves hit my arm. Just grazed me." She opened the door. "Get in before he comes back." He slid into the passenger seat, wincing. Blood darkened the sleeve of his coat. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said. He chuckled hoarsely. "Somebody had to make sure that snake didn't torch your barn. Besides," he reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I found this before I left." He handed it to her. She unwrapped the fabric and froze. It was an old brass key, ornate and cold to the touch. Attached to it was a tarnished tag that read, "Lower Hatch, property of U.S. Geological Survey, 1911. Her eyes widened. "What's this?" Gideon's face was grave. "Proof your barn sits on top of an old federal tunnel. My grandfather must have sealed the entrance and hid the key. Reeves must have known." Eli leaned forward, whispering, "A tunnel? Like underground?" Gideon nodded. "The Wexler mine wasn't just a gold claim. It was connected to a secret vault, a place they used to hide more than money. Artifacts, records, maybe even evidence of what they did up here." Stella shivered. "And now Reeves wants it. He'll burn the mountain down to get it," Gideon said grimly. "But that key changes everything. He doesn't know you have it." They spent the next hour in silence, snow muffling the world around them. Stella stared at the key, its edges catching the dim light. She could feel something hum beneath her fingertips, as though the mountain itself was alive with secrets waiting to be unearthed. Finally, she looked up. "If what you're saying is true, there's another chamber under that barn. One my son might have walked right above when he found those coins." Gideon nodded. "That's right. Then we need to go back." He turned sharply toward her. "Are you insane?" "He's got a gun, and he's probably not alone." She met his eyes, voice hard. "You said your grandfather hid something important down there. If we leave it, Reeves gets it. And if he gets it, more people die." Eli's small voice broke through. "Mom, are we going back?" She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Yes, but this time we're ready." By dusk they were moving again. Stella drove with purpose, headlights cutting through the storm. As they neared the ridge, the faint outline of the barn appeared against the snow, black and broken, like a scar on the landscape. "No lights, no movement. Looks empty," Gideon muttered. "Or a trap," Stella said. She parked behind the line of trees. The three of them climbed out, breath frosting in the cold. Gideon carried his shotgun, Stella the flashlight and key. Eli followed close, his small boots crunching softly in the snow. They slipped through the broken barn door. Inside, everything was silent. The trap door lay open again, gaping like a wound. "Stay close," she whispered. They climbed down, one by one. The cellar was damp, colder than before. The walls glistened with moisture. Gideon pointed to the far side. "There," he said. "That section wasn't part of the original foundation." Stella knelt, brushing away the dirt. Beneath the mud was metal, an old hatch, rusted but intact. A small keyhole gleamed faintly in the beam of her flashlight. She glanced at the brass key in her hand. This must be it. As she slid it into the lock, the mechanism gave a low, grinding click. The hatch shuddered, then creaked open. A rush of cold air poured out, thick with the scent of earth and oil. Beyond it, a narrow tunnel sloped downward into blackness. Eli clutched her arm. "Mom!" She took a deep breath. "We've come this far." She lifted the flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel descended sharply, the walls lined with rotting timber beams. Faded markings were etched into the stone, numbers, initials, symbols she didn't recognize. 50 feet in, the passage opened into a chamber, and there, half buried in the dirt, was a steel vault door. Its hinges corroded, its face stamped with the seal of the U.S. Treasury, 1910. Gideon exhaled, voice trembling. "Dear God, it's real!" But before Stella could speak, a faint sound echoed from behind them. Footsteps, not one set, several. And then, Reeves's voice cold and calm. "Didn't I tell you, Stella? You should have just left the mountain to me." The air in the tunnel thickened with fear and dust. The echo of boots striking stone was slow, deliberate, measured like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Stella Jones froze in front of the steel vault door, flashlight trembling in her grip. Gideon raised the shotgun, eyes narrowed toward the darkness behind them. Eli clung to his mother's coat, small fingers trembling. Colton Reeves's voice slithered through the tunnel. "Didn't I tell you? Some doors should never be opened." Stella's throat tightened. "You followed us." Reeves's silhouette appeared from the shadows, his gun gleaming under the beam of his flashlight. 2 men followed, both dressed in dark tactical coats, both armed. "I didn't follow," he said mildly. "I waited. I knew your curiosity would drag you back down here." He motioned toward the vault with his gun. "And here we are. The last secret of the Wexler mine." Gideon's jaw tightened. "You don't even know what's behind that door." Reeves smiled faintly. "I don't have to. I know it's worth more than any gold you pulled out of the ground." He stepped closer, gesturing to one of his men. "Open it." The man crouched beside the vault and began running his hand along the frame. "It's sealed solid, sir." "Old lock, reinforced." Reeves turned to Stella. "You seem to have a knack for finding keys, Mrs. Jones. Care to do the honors?" Her pulse roared in her ears. "You think I'll help you?" His voice dropped, almost kind. "You've got a child, don't you? Let's not pretend you'll risk his life for a pile of dust and paper," Eli whimpered. Stella's grip on the flashlight tightened. Then Gideon spoke. "You won't get a thing, Reeves." He lifted the shotgun. The tunnel exploded with the echo of the blast. The shot slammed into the rock inches from Reeves's head, showering him with debris. Reeves fired back instantly. The bullet grazed Gideon's shoulder, spinning him into the wall with a cry. Stella screamed, dropping to cover Eli. The flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam rolling wildly across the walls. The men exchanged fire, the noise deafening in the confined space. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal and stone. Then the flashlight beam steadied on something at the base of the vault door, a small plaque, half buried in dirt, engraved with the words, "Inherit the silence." Her mind whirled. Inherit the silence. What did that mean? Reeves's voice cut through the chaos. Enough! He fired once more. The shot echoed, then died into an awful stillness. Gideon slumped against the wall, gasping, blood soaking his coat. Reeves exhaled slowly, lowering his gun. "Now," he said softly, "we open the vault." He grabbed Stella by the arm and yanked her forward. "The key, now!" Her mind raced. She could feel Eli trembling behind her. She looked at the key in her pocket. The brass one she'd found with Gideon. If she gave it to him, he'd open whatever was buried here. And from the way he spoke, it wasn't just about gold. Her gaze darted to the plaque again. Inherit the silence. Maybe it wasn't a command, it was a warning. She forced herself to look calm. "You're right," she said quietly. "Let me." Reeves stepped back, keeping his gun trained on her. She crouched beside the vault and slid the key into the slot. It fit perfectly. The metal clicked once, a heavy sound echoing through the tunnel. The vault door groaned. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. "Step back," Reeves said. Slowly she did, but as she moved, she reached down and twisted the key the other direction. A metallic clank reverberated from deep within the wall, followed by a sharp hiss. Then the vault door began to move, outward, not inward. Reeves frowned. "What?" A sudden roar filled the chamber as jets of steam and dust burst from hidden vents. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Gideon's voice rasped weakly from the floor. "You fool! You triggered the purge." Stella staggered backward, grabbing Eli. "What's happening?" "The vault was booby-trapped," Gideon gasped. "It wasn't meant to be opened. It was meant to bury itself." Reeves's eyes went wide. "Get out! Move!" He and his men bolted for the tunnel entrance. Stella and Eli followed, Gideon limping behind. The earth shuddered violently. Old supports cracked and splintered. Chunks of rock crashed down as the tunnel began to collapse. They ran, coughing, blinded by dust. Stella could barely see Eli's outline ahead of her. She reached forward, grabbed his hand, and kept moving. Behind them, the vault door ripped free of its hinges and slammed to the floor with a sound like thunder. Then came the blast. A deep, muffled explosion tore through the mountain, throwing them to the ground. The air turned to smoke and earth and roaring fire. Stella's ears rang as she tried to push herself up. "Eli! Eli!" He was there, coughing, reaching for her. She pulled him close, shielding him with her body as debris rained around them. When the rumbling finally stopped, there was silence, thick and absolute. Minutes passed before she dared move. Her flashlight flickered weakly on the ground beside her. She grabbed it, shining it toward the way they'd come. The tunnel was gone, completely caved in. The vault, the chamber, buried under tons of stone. Gideon was alive but barely conscious. Reeves and his men were nowhere in sight, either buried or fled. "Help me," she said to Eli, pulling Gideon's arm over her shoulder. Together, they staggered toward the sliver of pale light far ahead. When they finally emerged into the open air, the night was clear. The barn above had partially collapsed again, smoke curling from its rafters. Stella helped Gideon to the snow, both of them gasping for breath. Eli looked at the smoking ruin, his voice small. "Mom, it's all gone." She nodded slowly, exhaustion pressing down on her. Maybe that's how it was meant to be. But as she spoke, Gideon coughed and motioned weakly toward the pocket of his coat. "There's something you need to see," he rasped. She reached inside and pulled out a small oilskin envelope, one she hadn't seen before. Inside was a single yellowed photograph of a man standing in front of the same vault door they'd just seen. In his hand, he held an envelope marked with the words, "To the one who inherits the silence. The truth lies where water meets fire." Stella's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Gideon's eyes fluttered open. "It means it isn't over." They sat in the snow until dawn broke, pink light washing over the mountain. The barn was a black silhouette against the rising sun. Stella looked at the photograph again. The words burned into her mind, "Where water meets fire." She thought of the stream that ran behind the ridge, the one that froze every winter, the one her son loved to play beside. Maybe there was something there, something Wexler had hidden even deeper. She tucked the photograph into her jacket. "Come on," she said softly. "We have to go before he comes back." "Who?" Eli asked. "Reeves," she said quietly, glancing once at the smoke. "If he's still alive, he won't stop." She looked up at the pale sky and whispered to herself, "But neither will I." The next morning broke grey and bitter cold. Frost clung to every branch, and smoke from the half-collapsed barn rose into the still air like a ghost reluctant to leave. Stella Jones stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the ruins that had nearly become her grave. The mountain looked peaceful now, but she knew better. Under that snow and timber lay secrets, bodies, and gold no one was meant to find. Behind her, Gideon Wexler sat on an overturned crate, his wounded arm bandaged in strips of fabric torn from her coat. Eli was beside him, feeding Scout, their old golden retriever, small bits of bread from the breakfast they'd managed to scavenge. "Mountain doesn't forgive," Gideon muttered, his voice gravelly. "My grandfather used to say that. He always believed this place would reclaim what men stole from it." Stella turned toward him, holding up the photograph they'd found in his coat. The man in it, Robert Wexler, stood before the same vault door, smiling faintly, the inscription clear as day. "To the one who inherits the silence, the truth lies where water meets fire." What did he mean? She asked. "Where water meets fire. There's nothing like that around here except the hot springs." Gideon looked up sharply. "Hot springs?" "On the eastern slope. About a mile past the stream," she said. "It's where the old geothermal pipes from the mining days still leak steam. It's been dry for years, but sometimes you can still smell sulfur in the air." He nodded slowly. "Then that's where he meant." Eli glanced between them. "So, Grandpa Wexler hid more treasure there?" Stella smiled faintly. "Maybe not treasure, honey. Maybe something more important." Gideon pushed himself up with effort. "If we're going to find out, we move before Reeves does. If he's alive, he'll be tracking us." Stella looked toward the mountain road, empty, silent, glinting under frost. "Then we'd better not leave tracks." They moved through the forest quietly, following a path Stella had learned long before she bought the barn. The trees grew denser, the ground sloping downward toward the valley. The faint trickle of running water led them to the stream, half frozen, winding like a silver scar through the snow. Eli knelt and touched the ice. "It's warm," he said softly. Stella crouched beside him, dipping her fingers in. The water was indeed warmer than it should have been. She could smell faint sulfur in the air. "Geothermal vents," Gideon murmured. "Wexler worked near the old hot spring system in 1910. He might have hidden something in the tunnels down there." Stella looked downstream, where steam rose faintly through the mist. "Then that's where we're going." They followed the stream for nearly an hour until the trees gave way to rocky terrain. Steam hissed from fissures in the ground, curling through patches of moss and snow. The air smelled of minerals and old earth. Eli pointed toward a jagged rock face ahead. "Mom, there!" Carved into the stone was a faint symbol, an overlapping W and R, the same initials etched into one of the gold coins they'd found weeks ago. Gideon ran his hand over it, awe in his eyes. "That's his mark, Robert Wexler's." Beside it, half concealed by roots and moss, was a narrow opening. Steam wafted out, carrying heat from deep within the mountain. Stella's pulse quickened. "Where water meets fire," she whispered. "This has to be it." They squeezed through the gap one by one, stepping into a cavern that glowed faintly with reflected light from mineral pools below. Warm water dripped from the ceiling in rhythmic plinks. Eli's voice echoed softly. "It's like a cave made of stars," she smiled. "Yeah, it is." Deeper in, they found a section where the rock had been cut by human hands, old mining tools, maybe. And there, half buried in stone, was a metal chest no larger than a suitcase. "Help me," Stella said, kneeling beside it. She brushed off the dirt and rust. The lid was sealed shut with lead solder, and the faint outline of an eagle crest was still visible. Gideon's voice trembled. "That's the U.S. Treasury seal. Same as the vault." Stella took a deep breath and pried at the edge with a loose rock. The metal gave way with a low screech. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas, were stacks of documents, ledgers, maps, and what looked like engineering blueprints. The ink had faded, but the seals were unmistakable. "Department of the Interior, U.S. Geological Survey, 1909-1911. "What is all this?" she whispered. Gideon lifted one of the folders carefully. "Evidence," he said. "Proof the Wexler mine was never just a gold claim. They were burying something, experiments, chemical testing." "See this?" He pointed to a faded label. "Sulfur ventilation study, classified." He exhaled. "The fire beneath the mountain wasn't natural. They caused it," Eli frowned. "But why would they hide it?" "Because," Gideon said grimly, "men died when the tunnels caught fire. The gold robbery wasn't theft, it was a cover-up. Wexler stole the government's hush money and hid the truth instead." Stella felt the world tilt around her. "He wasn't a criminal. He was trying to protect people." Gideon nodded slowly. "And he paid for it with his life." A sound echoed behind them, gravel crunching. They spun around. Reeves stood in the entrance. Face pale, coat torn, one arm bleeding, but his gun steady. "Touching," he said. "You've uncovered a century-old scandal. But unfortunately for you, it still belongs to the U.S. government." Gideon's voice hardened. "You mean it belongs to you?" Reeves raised the gun. "Step away from the chest." Stella stepped in front of Eli. "You don't have to do this, Colton." He sneered. "You think I came this far to leave empty-handed? These papers, these could make me untouchable." Before he could move closer, Gideon lifted the shotgun one-handed and fired. The blast hit the ceiling, sending a shower of rock down. Reeves stumbled, firing wildly. The bullet tore through Gideon's side, but he didn't fall. "Run!" he shouted. "Mom!" Eli cried. "Go!" Stella grabbed his hand, dragging him toward the back of the cavern. Steam thickened as they ran, the air growing hotter. Behind them, Reeves screamed curses, the echo bouncing off the stone walls. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a boiling pool of water, the heart of the hot spring. A narrow wooden bridge, half rotted, crossed to a ledge on the other side. Stella didn't hesitate. She pushed Eli across first, the boards creaking under their weight. Halfway across, a gunshot cracked. The wood splintered. "Mom!" Eli screamed. She lunged, shoving him the rest of the way. The bridge gave way beneath her feet. For one terrifying second she fell, grabbing a chain of old piping jutting from the wall. Steam roared up around her, scalding her hands. Reeves appeared on the opposite ledge, eyes wild. "Where is it, Stella?" She gritted her teeth, hanging from the pipe. "You'll never find it." He raised the gun again, but before he could fire, the ground beneath him trembled. Gideon's final shot thundered from the other side of the cavern. The blast struck the rock near Reeves's feet, triggering a small explosion from a sulfur vent. Flames erupted. Reeves screamed as the ledge crumbled beneath him. He fell into the boiling pool, his gun disappearing with him. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of steam. Eli crawled back toward the edge, sobbing. "Mom!" She heaved herself up, gasping, her hands blistered but alive. He threw his arms around her neck, trembling. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." But when she looked back, Gideon was gone, his shotgun lying near the chest, the cave behind him collapsing under falling debris. She knew he'd stayed behind on purpose, to make sure no one else could use what they found. By the time Stella and Eli emerged from the cavern, dawn had broken again. Steam curled behind them, like the ghost of the mountain itself. They stood at the edge of the ridge, the morning light painting the snow gold. Eli looked up at her. "Mom, what do we do now?" She took a deep breath, clutching the photograph in her pocket. "We keep the truth safe. That's what Wexler wanted." He frowned. "But we don't have the gold anymore." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we found something worth more." 3 days passed before Stella Jones could breathe without the mountain air feeling like smoke. The cavern had collapsed behind them, sealing the past inside, along with Gideon Wexler's final act of defiance. Now the mountain was eerily calm. The snow had melted around the hot springs, leaving a faint ring of steam that curled into the cold dawn. Stella stood by the riverbank, hands wrapped in fresh bandages, eyes fixed on the rising mist. Eli slept inside the cabin, his head resting against Scout's golden fur. The boy had cried himself to sleep 2 nights in a row, whispering Gideon's name like a prayer he didn't understand. In her pocket, Stella still carried the photograph of Robert Wexler, the man who'd started this all. And in a metal lockbox by her bedside sat the documents they had rescued before the cave-in, government seals, engineering schematics, and the journal Gideon had kept in his coat. The words on the first page haunted her. "The truth can set men free, or bury them alive. I only hope she knows the difference." By noon, the snow began to fall again. A knock came at the door, soft but deliberate. Stella froze. Scout lifted his head and growled. She opened the door slowly. A woman in a dark grey parka stood there, her badge clipped to her belt. "Mrs. Jones?" "Yes. I'm Special Agent Laura Keene, Department of the Interior. May I come in?" Stella hesitated. "Is this about Colton Reeves?" The woman's jaw tightened. "He's been reported missing. Last seen near the Wexler Ridge site." His vehicle was found at the base of the slope. Stella's pulse steadied. You think I had something to do with it? Keen's eyes flicked over the bandages on her hands. I think you know more than you're saying. I know a man died trying to protect something that wasn't his to begin with, Stella said quietly. And another man died because he couldn't let go of greed. The agent studied her face. We've been aware of certain irregularities with the Wexler Mining Company files for years. Then you show up, buy a piece of condemned property, and suddenly the entire ridge collapses. You can see how that looks. I can. Then help me understand, Mrs. Jones. What were you looking for? Stella met her gaze. A reason to start over. That's all. When the agent left an hour later, Stella watched her jeep disappear down the mountain road. Eli came out from the back room, rubbing his eyes. Mom, who was that? Just someone asking about the past, she said. Did you tell her? She shook her head. Some things aren't meant to be dug up again. Eli frowned. But you said we have to keep the truth safe. We will, by not letting it destroy anyone else. That night, while Eli slept, Stella sat by the table with Gideon's journal open under a lantern's flickering light. She turned to the last page, the one written the night before the explosion that killed his crew, more than a century ago. I buried what I could near the vent, not for riches but for memory. The gold is bloodstained, but the truth, that's pure. One day, someone will find it who isn't afraid to see the mountain for what it really is, alive, and merciful only to those who respect it. Beneath the entry was a map, hand-drawn, marked with a single red X, not far from the creek below their cabin. Stella's breath caught. She hadn't noticed it before. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "You clever bastard." By sunrise, she had a shovel in hand. Eli followed her, still half asleep, Scout trotting beside him. "Where are we going?" "On a walk," she said. "One last one." The creek glistened under a layer of thin ice. Frost shimmered on the banks where the first light touched. Stella stopped at a mossy boulder, marked by a small indentation, a hand-carved W. She began to dig. Eli helped, clearing rocks and dirt until the metal edge of a box clanged beneath their shovels. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and still dry after more than a century, were several gold bars, each stamped with the old Wexler mining insignia. Eli's eyes went wide. "Mom, is that 6 million, maybe more?" she murmured, staring at the shining metal. "What was left after Wexler gave the rest to the miners' families." Eli's voice trembled. "Are we rich?" She looked at him, really looked. His wind-chapped cheeks, the hope in his eyes, the innocence that had somehow survived all of this. "No," she said softly. "We're free." That afternoon, Stella packed the gold bars into the old pickup and drove down the mountain alone. She didn't tell Eli where she was going, only that she'd be back by nightfall. The road wound through the valley like a scar. When she reached the small town of Creighton Falls, she parked outside the First National Bank and carried a single bar inside. The clerk's eyes widened. "Ma'am, it's for donation," she said firmly. "To the local historical trust. Anonymous," the clerk blinked. "All of it?" She smiled faintly. "Just enough." That night she returned home. Eli was waiting by the fire. "Did you sell it?" he asked. "No," she said, sitting beside him. "I gave some away. The rest I hid somewhere safe." "Why?" She reached for his hand. "Because that gold didn't belong to us. But the life we build after this, that does." He leaned against her shoulder. "I think Gideon would have liked that." Stella smiled through her tears. "I think so too." Outside, the wind rose and swept through the pines, whispering over the ridge. Snow fell again, soft and unthreatening this time. The barn ruins were almost invisible beneath the drift, as though the mountain itself had decided to close the chapter. But inside the cabin, mother and son sat together, their world finally quiet. For the first time in years, Stella Jones didn't feel like she was surviving the mountain. She felt like she belonged to it. Spring came late to Wexler Ridge. For months, snowmelt had turned the creek into a roaring vein of silver that split the valley, carrying the ghosts of winter away. The barn ruins were gone now, buried under wildflowers and moss. Only a few warped boards and the smell of pine tar remained. Stella Jones stood on the porch of her cabin, mug of coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the distant peaks. For the first time in years, the light didn't feel like a warning. It felt like forgiveness. Behind her, Eli's laughter echoed from inside as Scout barked in excitement. The boy was helping build a wooden shelf, measuring each plank with the precision of a small craftsman. His voice was lighter now. He no longer whispered Gideon's name in his sleep. He still carried the memory, but not the burden. And Stella had finally found peace in that truth. 2 months had passed since she'd buried the last of the gold. 3 bars wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in a place even she might forget one day. The rest had gone to rebuild the old miners' cemetery and fund a small community school in Creighton Falls. The locals didn't ask where the money came from. They just said, "The mountain must be smiling on us again," and left it at that. For Stella, that was enough. She no longer dreamed of escape or riches. Her plans were simpler now. Keep Eli safe, grow food for the coming summer, and rebuild what little she could from the ashes of her past. One afternoon, as the last frost melted from the eaves, a familiar truck rumbled up the mountain road. It wasn't a government vehicle. It was old, beaten up, and painted forest green, the same color as the ranger patrols from the next county. The driver stepped out, a woman in her late 50s, silver hair braided down her back, eyes sharp as the cold air. "You must be Stella Jones," she said. "Her name's Ruth Calder. I was a friend of Gideon's." Stella froze. "You knew him?" Ruth nodded. "We worked together years ago. I was his contact in the Forestry Bureau when he started chasing the Wexler records. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should come here." She handed Stella a sealed envelope. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. Gideon's neat, slanted script. Stella's throat tightened as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a pressed mountain daisy. "If you're reading this, Stella, it means you made it out alive." The gold was never the treasure. It was the story, the proof that good people can still do the right thing when no one's watching. Keep your son close. The mountain remembers those who love it. G.W. Stella pressed the letter to her chest. The wind moved through the pines, whispering his words back at her like an echo. Ruth stayed for supper. Over stew and biscuits, she told stories about Gideon, how he'd once saved a family trapped in a mine collapse, how he'd spent his final years searching for a way to right his grandfather's wrongs. "He believed in the land more than he believed in people," Ruth said quietly. "But when he met you, that changed." Stella looked down, smiling sadly. "He believed in the mountain. I just listened when it called." Ruth reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Then keep listening. Because mountains don't forget, Stella. They test us until we remember who we are." That night, after Ruth left, Stella sat outside, watching the stars blink awake one by one. Eli came to sit beside her, Scout curling up at their feet. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think the mountain knows us?" She smiled. "I think it knows everyone who respects it." He pointed toward the ridge. "Then it remembers Gideon, too," she nodded. Always, for a while, they said nothing. The night was still, except for the crackle of the fire and the faint hoot of an owl somewhere down the valley. Then, from deep within the mountain, came a low rumble. Not thunder, something older, deeper. The ground trembled lightly beneath them, as though the ridge itself was sighing. Eli grabbed her hand. "Is it an earthquake?" Stella listened closely. The sound faded, replaced by the bubbling of the creek. When she looked toward the slope where the cave had collapsed, she saw faint wisps of steam rising again, curling in the moonlight like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. "No," she whispered. "It's just breathing." The next morning, she hiked to the ridge alone. The snow had melted completely now, revealing a narrow path leading to a small stone marker someone, perhaps Gideon before he died, had placed there. Carved into the rock was a simple inscription. For those who listened, she laid the mountain daisy from his letter beside it and knelt in the grass. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." When she stood again, a breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil. It felt like the mountain's way of saying farewell. Weeks later, life had settled into rhythm. Eli helped mend fences, Scout chased rabbits in the meadow, and Stella found herself smiling more than she cried. The cabin no longer felt like a place to hide. It was home. One evening, as she read on the porch, Eli came running from the creek. "Mom, you need to see this." She followed him down the hill, breath catching when she saw it. The hot spring vent had reopened. The water, once dark and sulphurous, was now clear as glass, reflecting the pink light of sunset. Eli dipped his hand in. "It's warm again." Stella looked at the shimmering pool and felt something deep inside her ease. The fire beneath the mountain had cooled. The balance was restored. Gideon had been right. The mountain remembered. As the sun slipped behind the peaks, Stella stood with her son, the wind tugging at their clothes, the valley glowing gold. She thought of the woman she had been when she arrived here, broken, afraid, lost at the world's edge. Now she was something else entirely, a mother, a survivor, a keeper of truth and silence. Eli slipped his hand into hers. "What happens now, Mum?" She smiled, watching the last rays fade over the mountains. "Now," she said softly, "we live. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.